Was George Washington ever here in our town, do you think?
Yeah.
Well, I hate to disappoint you, he was not.
No.
But he was very close. He was very close. He was in Greenbrook, up on Washington Rock, if you've ever been up there. It's a nice place to visit.
Oh, okay.
And Washington played a key part in the battle we're going to talk about from his perch up on Washington Rock. But anyway, this valley that we're in now, it's called Washington Valley. This was called Stony Point. Let me take you back to the year 1777, where the first big, Washington wasn't here, but two great big things happened here that I'm going to tell you about. But let me take you back to the year 1777, here in this little valley. There were only about 40 or 50 families in the whole valley, all the way from Chatham to Bridgewater. It was very loosely populated. It was populated mostly by Dutch. The Dutch were here first. They were here, and this was called New Amsterdam until 1667. And Princess Wetumpka and Chief Woolfeather, that you all heard about if you're Watchung fans.
Yeah.
You know, that was probably in the 1600s, but now we're talking about, fast forward over here, we're talking about the Revolutionary War period, 1777. This valley here was a bastion. And the big thing about Watchung that protected it was the first ridge, the ridge overlooking Route 22. They call this Fortress Watchung because you were between the first and the second ridge. Now, why is it a fortress? Because the whole British Army that we're going to talk about was right down here in Plainfields, Scotch Plains, Edison, Watchung, Piscataway, but they never selected this little pass to come through it, a beautiful little pass, Somerset Street. Why didn't the British attack George Washington, who was up in Jockey Hollow and camping back here, through this pass? Well, the first reason was it's easily defended. You come down Somerset Street, and you wouldn't want to go through there with an army and have the enemy on both sides of the mountain firing down on you. You never would have made it through. And even if you got through, what happens? You get past the second ridge through this valley where we are right now. You walk right across here, and you run into another ridge. And that's the third ridge. That's Long Hill in that area, Myersville.
Yeah.
And after you go through there, if you were managing to get through there, you got a swamp. You got the Great Swamp. So Washington camped 2 years in Morristown, Jockey Hollow, and defending him, he had the first ridge, the second ridge, the third ridge, and the Great Swamp. So that's why Jockey Hollow was so. But when they were looking for a campground in 1779, they almost selected this place here. But first of all, Washington sent out a scouting party. They looked down along Route 22, which wasn't there at the time, of course, and that wasn't too well defended. So what they did is they went through down Summer Street. They came into here and said, you know, this is really great. There's food supplies here. There's a brook running through it. There's waterways. But they decided not to use it because Jockey Hollow was much more secure with all these natural barriers. Now I'm going to take you to 1777, and let me tell you what's going on in the big picture. Washington is in a place called Middlebrook, okay, that's Bridgewater. And in the high ground above Bridgewater, where the shopping mall is now in that area, was a big campground called Middlebrook Campground, and he spent 2 winters there. So in 1777, he's in Middlebrook. He can walk down along the ridge for about a half a mile from Bridgewater, half a mile to a mile, and he comes across a rock, Washington Rock, and he gets out there and he finds he's got a perfect view of the whole central plains of New Jersey. He can see from 30 miles, he can almost see Staten Island. And in those days, there weren't as many trees, it was all plowed fields, so Washington can see the whole panoramic view of the plains of New Jersey, as they call them. Now, who was down in the plains of New Jersey? The whole British Army. 16,000 people. They're coming up from Princeton. They go through New Brunswick. They're heading for Perth Amboy. And Washington only has about 7,000 or 8,000 troops in Middlebrook. What the British want to do, they want to get Washington down out of the mountains, out of Middlebrook, Bridgewater, bring him down onto the plains around Piscataway and have a knockdown, drag-out battle. They got them outnumbered, they got them outgunned, and they want to polish off the Americans and end the war. And Washington would like to come down because all this whole plain area from here to Staten Island was occupied by the British, and they're pillaging American homes, and they're terrorizing the Patriots. But he wouldn't come down because he doesn't want to risk the army. Who's the Continental Army? That's the end of it for America. So anyway, he's up on his rock and he sees the whole British pulling out. They're going towards Staten Island, they're getting on boats, they're leaving. So he pulls the whole Continental Army and he takes them down to Piscataway, Quibbletown, they called it in those days, and down onto the plains. And lo and behold, it's a trick. The British turn around, they start coming back, and the whole Continental Army is very close to being annihilated, but for one reason. Washington is foresighted. He sends this man, General Sterling, who was a New Jersey boy, by the way, he sends them to protect his left flank. His left flank is in Scotch Plains, Watchung, Plainfield, and the only way the British can get around the Middlebrook is to come that way. So he sends General Sterling down with 2,000 men. He sends them down to defend his left flank, and that time that they're delaying the British that are coming up allows General Washington to pull the Continental Army back, and then the Continental Army lives to fight another day. But the story lies in the battle, which is called the Battle of the Short Hills. Now, there's a British general, Lord Cornwallis. This is an interesting story, and you're going to be familiar with a lot of these places. General Sterling was down there around the Plainfield Country Club. You all been past there?
Yeah.
Down Woodland Lane.
Yeah.
And those are his defense positions, and he's got 2,000 men. Now the British have 16,000 men, heavy artillery. Everybody is with them, all their generals, Cornwallis, Sir Henry Clinton, every general in the British Army. They're going to attack Washington, they think they're going to. They leave Perth Amboy early in the morning, and there's two prongs of the attack there. One comes up from Metuchen, one comes up from Perth Amboy. They're going to meet at Oak Tree Junction, essentially what is Plainfield Country Club. But when they do that, they start running into resistance. Cornwallis's army gets to Edison, and they run into the fighting. That's Plainfield Country Club. That's about where the American cannons were. The Americans have 3 French brass cannon. A short time ago, when I wrote the book, the president of the Plainfield Country Club took me for a ride in a golf cart. We went up and down, and we got between holes 4 and 7, and I said, "Stop, let me tell you what happened here." He said, "You gotta be kidding." This was the Continental Army's position, firing down from the heights, the short hills, which is really Plainfield Country Club. I never knew there were hills there, but there are. And they were firing down on what today is Andover Road, Kingley Lane, and it was a knockdown, drag-out battle, but you got 2,000 Americans against 16,000 British. You can guess what's gonna happen. They're driven off of Plainfield Country Club. Their cannons are captured. The American gets slaughtered. They fall back. That's around New Dover Road where the battle started. That's how it looks today. There's a bank there. In fact, there's a little park and a monument there. That's a German map of, believe it or not, Scotch Plains, Plainfield. It's hard to read, I know, but it's an original German map owned by the Hessian troops. So the Americans are losing the battle. They fall down, they fall back into a place called Ash Swamp, which is in Scotch Plains today. And they go down Old Raritan Road, which runs right along the side of the Plainfield Country Club. And they're getting picked off, they're getting slaughtered, and they finally retreat. And herein lies the story about Watchung. They retreat across Route 22, and they go up Bonnie Burn Road. And there are 27 wagons full of wounded, bleeding, dying American soldiers. They're dragged up in ox carts, horse carts, up Barney Burn Road, and right down Valley Road. Turns into Mountain Boulevard. They go down to Middlebrook encampment, and they're taken care of down there. What was left of Sterling's force of 2,000 retreated right through Watchung on June 26, 1777. It all happened right here. And I sat up in my house for years and looked down on the valley and never appreciated what happened. The Americans came through here, but the British continued on to Westfield. And there's an old house down there, it's called the Frazee house, and there was a lady there by the name of Betty Frazee. She was baking bread, and Lord Cornwallis, the top British general, goes to her and he says, "Give me that bread." And she said, "General, I'll give you that bread in fear, but not in love." And he said, "Keep your bread." So that's the legend of Frazee. The house is still there, it's fallen apart, and she's buried in the Westfield Cemetery by the Presbyterian Church. That's what listed as the old house. She was married to a carpenter, and they lie in Westfield. British continue on to Westfield. They desecrate Westfield. They slaughter cattle on the altar of the Presbyterian Church. They're only there one night. They cut down fruit trees. They take all the livestock. They billet themselves in houses throughout Westfield and pillage the houses. Were any Americans in Westfield? No, because when they knew the British were coming, and they were coming out of Scotch Plains, heading towards Westfield, they rang the church bells and they all evacuated. So that's the story of the Short Hills, and Watchung plays a very prominent part in that story. Now, why you never hear of this battle? Why is it you never hear of this battle? It was a pivotal battle in what they call the Forage Wars of America. I'll tell you why. There's a place up in Essex County, it's called Short Hills, and it confuses people. Everybody thinks the Battle of Short Hills was in Short Hills, which is a town. And it wasn't. It was in Plainfield and Scotch Plains and Watchung. So it caused confusion. The other thing, before I forget to tell you, for 200 years, if you asked a Watchung resident what the name of that street is that runs up by the Colorado Cafe, you know what they tell you? They wouldn't say Bonnyburn Road. They would say Bloody Gap. That was the name of Bonnyburn Road for maybe 150 years after this battle. And nobody ever knew that. I found that in the records. They're talking about Bloody Gap. I find this in the records. Until I get down, I'm talking to a lady in the Watchung Historical Society, or the Scotch Plains Historical Society, and I said, the retreat was up Bonnyburn Road. She says, "You know, that was called Bloody Gap." I said, "Oh, thank heavens, I wasn't wrong." But that's the story, and that's the Frazee house. So, but what's significant about this battle? There were a lot of battles in the Revolution, but I'll tell you what some special things that happened there. Number one, the Stars and Stripes of our country was adopted as a national flag on June 14th, 1777. This battle was on June 26, 1777, which means to me that the first time the Stars and Stripes were ever flown in combat was in Scotch Plains, Plainfield, Watchung.
Wow.
I can't find any evidence to substantiate that, but that's my theory, and that's pretty significant.
Wow.
The second thing is, for the first time in the war, French officers stood beside American officers as allies, fought together. Those cannon were French cannon. We were using supplies from there. When the British were coming up from Perth Amboy, as I noted to you, they got to Edison, a place called Green Street. And, you know, talk about the forgotten revolution. Green Street, where the first skirmish of the battle was taken, is intersected now by the Parkway, Route 1, Route 35, the railroad, and you stand there and you say, "Yeah, I can't see a battle." Well, that was it. It was called Strawberry Hill. And Strawberry Hill in Edison, in the Battle of the Short Hills, was the first time and the only time in the Revolutionary War where repeating rifles were used. The British had a rifle called the Ferguson rifle. It fired 6 shots. And it was tremendous, only they were suspicious of it, and they stayed with their single-shot musket. Battle of Short Hills. Archaeologists have combed that area, and I know one of the archaeologists, his name is Wade Katz, he comes from Milner Associates, and they found precious little. And they found a belt buckle and a couple other things, but they also found some musket balls. Musket balls are little round balls that were put in the muskets and fired. Those musket balls were dipped in fungus and poisoned, and they were used by both sides. So Battle of Short Hills is the first time that musket balls or chemical warfare was used in the American Revolution. So that gets me to Cannonball. Before you're going to miss the best part here. This Cannonball here. You want to hear about this? These two cannonballs, this is about a 3-pound cannonball. It was found by Mike Finney in Watchung, up on Johnson Drive, right near Bonnieburn Road. He also found this smaller cannonball. Now that's an American shell. I can identify it because it's crudely cast. This is a shell that comes out of a smaller gun that looks something like this, and that's good because it was mobile. It could be pulled by 2 men or 1 horse. But he found these up on there. This other cannonball has been a part of the collection here. It was found on Winans Lane. I don't know how it got there. There was no military activity, but that was found there. And that pretty much was the Battle of the Short Hills. Let's fast forward. The year is 1781. The war is coming to an end. Washington is up in Westchester County, and he's looking down in New York. New York was in British hands during the whole war. They took New York, they kept New York City for the whole war. That was their headquarters. But Washington, his army has been rejuvenated. He's up there in Westchester County. The French join him, and he's all set to attack New York from Westchester County with his allies, the French. And by the way, they may even have a fleet out in the harbor there to help him out. So General Rochambeau comes out from New England, meets with Washington, and Washington said, "French, we are glad to see you. We're going to attack soon, right down into New York." And the French went, "Wait a minute. We can do that, but those British have been there for 7 years. They got forts, they got redoubts, they are zeroed in on every crossroads. They're waiting for us. We can probably win the battle, but it will be a Pyrrhic victory, meaning we'll lose so many people it'll really be a loss. It'll be a slaughter." So Washington said, "Got a better idea?" And Rochambeau puts down his wine glass and he says, "Yes, we're going to attack the British in Virginia." Virginia, Washington says, "That's 500 miles away. I got guys in New England that have to march 600 miles. Yeah, the British are down there in a peninsula, it's called Yorktown, but you know, they could be evacuated, they may not even be there when we get there. When the British find out we're marching, they're gonna pick us off all the way down, and we're gonna be decimated by the time we reach there." And Rochambeau says, "No, we're gonna keep it a secret." A secret? Yep, we're gonna keep our march to Yorktown a secret. And they do. They cross over, they come down through Suffern, and they come down to Pompton. The whole British, the whole French army, and they're moving to Washington, they're keeping it a secret. Not only they keep it a secret, but they really do some tricks. They bring boats with them, because the British think they're going to attack through Staten Island. They don't. They not only bring boats, but they build a bakery in Chatham, because the army had to have bread. And they did all the things, so the British were really convinced that they were going to be attacked from Staten Island. But they kept going, and it was really a secret, and they didn't tell everybody until they got to Trenton. And American generals were furious. They said to me, "George Washington, I'm a major general in your army, and you don't even tell me where I'm going till I'm halfway there." But anyway, they marched through Jersey, and here we get back to our story about Watchung. There's 3 columns, and you've got like 12,000 men running through little country towns in New Jersey, little villages. Farmers are coming out in the streets with bread they bake to offer to the troops. You get down to Pompton, the army splits. The French go through Morristown, they go through Liberty Corner, called Bullion's Tavern. Washington continues on route through, he gets to Summit, he continues right on down through Route 24, and he goes down to Springfield, and then he heads down south, the Mountain Road. But the main part of the army, where they had all their supplies, the horses, the wagons, the artillery, all the supplies, are in the middle column. And the middle column goes down Route 78 from Summit. They turn into what today is Diamond Hill Road, come down Diamond Hill Road, turn on the Valley Road. So the whole third of the army with all the supplies in the summer of 1781 marched right past us. And because they had all the supplies, they wanted to hide behind that first bridge. So again, Watchung plays a significant part in the war because of of geography. The real tragic thing is the American public had a misconception of who these soldiers were. The public conception of a Revolutionary War soldier was this: he was a zealot patriot. He ran, he grabbed his musket off his fireplace, he went out and he fought the British villains and in a patriotic spirit. He came back and went back to his plow. Well, that wasn't the American soldier. At first it was. Lexington, Concord, Bunker Hill, the early engagements, they were yeoman farmers that actually left their plows and went back. But we got 6 months into the war, and that wasn't working. Those people were going home to their farms. They weren't the soldiers that won the war. The soldiers that won the war were a very underprivileged class. They were the dregs of society. They were landless. They were people who joined up, not for patriotism, I hate to tell you, but to get a square meal, to get a uniform, and for adventure. Some of them, most of them were farm boys, not farmers, farm laborers. Didn't have the land. Some of them hadn't even been to the town. There's usually a farm and there's a town a couple miles away. Some of them hadn't even been to the town. So the war was a great adventure. So I find in all the accounts that I've read, first person, patriotism doesn't appear very much. I'm sorry to say that, but there were 5,000 African Americans in the Continental Army. There were people right off the boat. They talk about the Irish. The Irish were really the Scotch-Irish Presbyterians, and they made the bulk of the army, and they went west and became our rednecks and hillbillies, but they were the people that made up the Continental Army. The average age was 20, but there were many, many teenagers. 16 was the lowest age you could go in the Army, but the Army got desperate, and they didn't ask any questions. I found kids in there. I found one boy from South Carolina, Nathan Futrell, age 7.
Oh my God.
And they were listed not as drummers or anything. They were listed right in with the troops. They were fighting right alongside with everybody else. So they were underprivileged people, and they were the ones that won the war. Why did they stay together? They had hunger. They didn't pay them. They had ragged clothes. The fear and the sting of battle, homesickness, all the things that most of us went through in wars, but we didn't have hunger, and they did. And they were my soldier was paid 8 times in 8 years. And it was such a big deal, they wrote it in their diaries. But why did they stay together? They stayed together because the Continental Army developed into a professional corps. They started winning battles. They were professional soldiers. They prided themselves on that. And the camaraderie, their friends, their buddies, that's why they stayed in the Army. And some of them even were enlisted under false terms. If you enlisted in the Continental Army in 1777, you enlisted for 3 years or the duration of the war. So you signed a paper, said 3 years, the duration of the war, 3 years, I'm out. Wrong. Continental Congress interpreted that as, or the duration of the war. They said, the war's not over. You've been in 3 years, but the war's not over. So that happened in Jockey Hollow. You had rampant desertions and all kinds of crazy things happening, but they did stay together, and they did win the war.